Welcome back. Now, there's a very disturbing report on Infowars.com today. Media promotes pedophile rights. Actually, that media is Salon. The article was by Kit Daniels, pointing out some of the things that they said, essentially establishing sexual rights for pedophiles, talking about it as something that is just an orientation. Maybe they're not acting on it. Maybe he's celibate. That's what he says, the person who wrote this op-ed piece for Salon. Joining me is Leanne McAdoo. Leanne, that's one of the things that's concerned everybody about the pedophile scandals within the Catholic Church. The fact that the Pope said, and was quoted by Repubblica, the largest circulation paper in Italy, was quoted as saying that about 2% of the Catholic clergy are pedophiles. If that's true, there's about 8,000 priests.
Right.
And that is a very troubling aspect because we've seen that they don't remain
exactly.
celibate. They say they are, but they don't remain.
Tell those children that have spoken out about it here and are calling for some justice that they're celibate. Mm-hmm. You know, it's taken them this long to just even admit that this is happening.
Well, this all ties together with the Pope's visit because we see this pedophilia expressing itself. Not only now it's coming out in the media. The media is coming out talking about it as if it's some kind of newly discovered sexual orientation, a new sexual right. But of course, we've been talking about this for quite some time. Going back to 2013, Business Insider reported that the Pope's resignation was due to a gay lobby within the Vatican, a scandal with that and with the Vatican Bank. It's very interesting that the Pope is all about shutting down capitalist banks and bank abuses, but there's a lot of reports that there's been major scandals by the Vatican Bank, as well as predatory gay lobby within the Vatican. Now, this is reported, as I pointed out, by La Repubblica. It's the largest circulation paper in Italy. They don't directly quote from the report, but they do point to the financial and sexual lobbies that have split the church, they say. And then shortly after this Pope took office, he was quoted by the same paper as saying that there's about 2% of the Catholic clergy that are pedophiles. They said that those pedophiles would be among the priests, the bishops, and the cardinals. He says others are more numerous, but know and keep quiet, he said. They punish without giving the reason, the Pope was quoted by saying. He says, I find this state of affairs intolerable. So there's a lot of signs that this has been going on. We know that there's been a lot of scandals like that. We know also that the UN has been involved with it, ISIS has been involved with it, and now we've got Salon pushing this.
Right, and this is going to be the new oppressed group calling for rights. Here he describes, you know, his discovery of an alternate sexuality, and just basically going on to describe how this all sort of came about. He felt incredibly inferior because he was born with a deformity. And when he was about 7, he was molested by a man that he didn't even know.
Well, before you go to that, he says, I was born without my right hand. He said, quickly set me apart from my peers. But he said, that was nothing. And he talks about the problem that he had to have a prosthesis and all the different things that caused him in life. He says, that was nothing compared to the final insult the universe would deal me. I've been struck with the most unfortunate of sexual orientations, a preference for a group of people who are legally, morally, and psychologically unable to reciprocate my feelings and my desires. So it's a sexual orientation, it's a preference, it's not a crime, it's not victimizing innocent children, it's just simply a sexual orientation, a preference, and of course, then once you establish that, repeatedly putting it out to the public, then you can establish that it is then a right, because we have seen the Supreme Court say that sexual orientation trumps religious freedom.
Right.
So I'm sure it trumps the informed consent of children.
And you have to respect it because, you know, now we're being taught to respect it because that's their culture, this is their orientation. And one of the things that I thought was really disturbing is that he talks about when he was 11 and his father they had heard some story of sexual assault happening to another child, and he heard his father saying, you know, they should take those guys out and just crush their genitals. And for him, you know, as an 11-year-old, he was like, well, I vividly remember that man touching me. And he said, I hardly felt it warranted that kind of response. Yeah. So here now he's going to start advocating on behalf of these pedophiles, basically saying, you know, I'm not a monster, just hear me out. Even though the reason he chooses not to do this is because he knows that he would be harming a child. So he knows this is wrong. He knows that it's not consensual. It's hurting a child. But, you know, he wants us all to be okay with it.
Well, this has been something that the elite have done for quite some time. We saw what happened with Jimmy Savile. How Jimmy Savile, they covered for him multiple times. There were investigations by people lower down in Scotland Yard. They were shut down by the people who were higher up. After Jimmy Savile died, there was a documentary investigation of what he had done. He was a very obvious pedophile, and it was shut down by the BBC. And of course, he has connections to the royal family. There's photographs of him with the Pope. We see that the elite are always involved in this, and now they want to try to make it normalized.
Right.
To protect themselves, and I think also, Leanne, to establish this brave new world sexuality that keeps people enslaved to the globalists, because they are tied up in their hedonism. They don't think beyond the immediate moment. That's what television is about. That's what the bread and circuses that we have are about. It's really like the final days of the Roman Empire, what we're starting to look at here. And one of the titles here is The Discovery of an Alternate Sexuality.
Right.
Putting it in these objective terms, you have to understand that in the large dictionaries, and I've got a very large unabridged dictionary, 650,000 words from the 1950s. And I looked up to see how they had defined marriage, how they defined homosexuality. And you know what? The word homosexuality was not even in that dictionary. The only thing they had was a pejorative term, sodomy, okay? They added homosexuality about a decade or so after that, and then very quickly went from a pejorative to a neutral, homosexual, then went from that to a positive, saying it's gay. That's the way that they move the normalcy window, okay? And that's what we're seeing happening here now.
Right, and that's how he finishes the article. So please, be understanding and supportive. It's really all we ask of you. Treat us like people with a massive handicap we must overcome, not as a monster. So this is what Kit Daniels says. This is pedophilia is starting to emerge as the next sexual rights revolution. Yes. And psychiatrists have already begun to advocate redefining pedophilia in the same way that they, like you mentioned, redefine homosexuality. In 1998, the American Psychiatric Association claimed the negative potential of adult sex with children was overstated, and that the vast majority of people who report, this sexual assault, they turned out fine. It was okay for them. Granted, this guy says it turned him into a pedophile.
And we've also seen that in not only the cover-up of Jimmy Savile, but we've also seen ministers there in the UK start to push that along with the North American Man-Boy Love Association. And then look at what happens with the UN, of course. They're frequently involved in this type of thing. There was a story going back to April the 29th this year, where the New American exposed what was going on with some French UN troops in Africa. They were caught abusing, they say, rape and sodomy of starving and homeless young boys by UN troops from France. Now, every page of this report that came out from a whistleblower was marked as confidential. Nevertheless, this guy was fired from his post. He'd been there for many years. He's now being investigated by the UN. So here's what we see again. You blow the whistle on something that is absolutely criminal by the government, and its French authorities were trying to investigate it, but it was the UN that was covering this up. And in this article back in April, the New American points out this has happened over and over and over again. And now we see that our surrogate, ISIS, also does the same thing with children.
Right, and they use the Quran to justify child rape. And the New York Times also reported yesterday that U.S. soldiers, so it's not only the UN, the whistleblowers, everything, U.S. soldiers are also being told to ignore sexual abuse of boys that's happening by our Afghan allies. So basically, we're going in and taking these cities, retaking the cities that were taken over by the Taliban, and then we're setting up the Afghan police there. And so then we're creating these pedophilic police to now police these villages, and they're raping the little boys. And they're told to ignore it because this is their culture. And so that's exactly what we're starting to see kind of seep over here. We've got to ignore it. This is their culture. It's an alternative sexuality here. And of course, ISIS is using the Quran to justify child rape, to justify young girls who are too young to have even gone through puberty, that it's completely okay. I mean, let's
see. That's exactly the problem, because children cannot give their consent. We've always recognized the fact that children can be manipulated, they can be victimized. It's just too easy.